Welcome to round 7, and this is the second part of our 2-part series. I don't know, maybe we'll make it a 3-part series. Depends on how today goes, I suppose. 2-part series on how to answer questions that you are asked during an interview. So we appreciate everybody being here. We're waiting on one more panelist, but he may join us late. It'd be great to have Sean here. We missed Sharon last week, so welcome back, Sharon.
Thank you. Me too.
And we are, just so everybody knows, we are putting together just kind of a little background on each one of us and our companies and our history in the industry and why it matters that we're talking about these things. We're not people who don't have experience talking about what we're talking about. So we want to give you some background and insight as to the sorts of backgrounds that we have. And I don't think any of us really refer to ourselves as experts necessarily. Maybe you guys do. I know that I'm learning every single minute of every single day that there's new stuff out there to contend with. But we're enjoying being a part of this and putting these things together for everyone. But I would like to start a tiny bit differently than we usually do, because usually I just throw it out there and say, can you guys introduce yourselves? But today I'm going to specifically call on people to introduce themselves. So Christian, if you could give us the number of years you've been doing this and a little bit about, your company and what you do as a company.
Oh, great. Yeah, thank you, Alan. So I came to Phoenix in 2003 thinking I was someone that was a humbling experience. I was unemployed for a year looking, and I swore that I was always going to help everyone who was looking. In 2004, I got into the recruiting industry. And then I worked together with some great professionals. And in 2009, I started Career Evolutions. And our goal is really just to kind of help everyone through the entire employment life cycle. So sometimes we have a job, sometimes we don't. And we wanted to be a part of that journey. And we've been doing this successfully now for over 10 years. And I'm just delighted to be a part of today and this neat group and sharing some of the thoughts.
Excellent. Well, we are glad you're here as well. Sharon Bondurant, how many years have you been in the recruiting and staffing industry? And tell us about your company.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, I've been doing this 25 years, which is, I'm dating myself. Every time I say that, I'm like, how could that be? Because it feels like I just started. But no, I was in the industry for about 3 years. And then I'm going to keep it really short because I know we only have an hour. But no, I was in the industry for about 3 years, and then I started my firm back in 1998, and it organically grew. I started in the technology space. We did IT and engineering placement back then, and we still do the technology piece of it, more on the IT side, as well as HR and finance. So most of our searches are mid to senior level and executive level. And we're working with people and clients and helping them connect and make kind of unlikely introductions. And I love it. I've loved it since I started it and continue to love it. There's always new challenges, and so it keeps it fun and exciting. So
no doubt.
I'm happy to be here.
This is not a boring gig.
No, every day it's different, especially right now.
Oh, sorry, Sharon. Sorry.
No, I was just saying right now it's a ride. So
yes, it is definitely a roller coaster ride. Hopefully we all like roller coasters.
Yeah.
Nick Morrison with Potiri.
Yeah, I think next week or the following week will be 8 years that I've been doing this. And it's funny, when I first started doing recruiting, I would never put the year on the documents that I would create. I would only put the month and a date because I'm like, there's no way I'm going to be doing this for more than a year. Because still at that point, I'm like, I'm going to go get the inside information on these jobs, and then I'll pick the greatest job that comes across in the next year, and I'll take that one. And so it's been almost 8 years doing that. And then about 3 years ago, I started Potiri, really in the pursuit of creating holistic solutions to get people engaged at work. The longer that I've been in this, and certainly not a long time, but time I've been in, so I've realized it really does take like a whole army and a whole big group of people in order to increase this thing called employee engagement. So I'm really excited to be here with you, and I consider the 3 and even Sean 4 of you experts. So excited to be here with you.
Excellent. Well, we are glad you all are here, certainly, and I've been doing this a long time too. Started in 1998 during a period of time where we were putting people to work for Y2K, which was fun. Because that was That was just another interesting time to be doing what we do for a living. That's for sure. So a little bit of a recap. I want to go through this very quickly, a recap of the last session that we did. So this is the second in our series of how to answer questions that are typically asked during an interview. And we had a very robust session last time. I would invite everyone, use the chat function, use the Q&A function. Please ask questions that you have. Even if there are questions that you've gotten during an interview recently or historically, that you'd like to get our feedback on how to answer it next time you get it, because odds are you will get those questions again. Feel free to throw that in the Q&A and say, how should I answer this next time I get it? But what we covered last time was I'm going to try to do this in summary form, but there's an infinite number of answers to the interview questions you're going to get. All we're trying to do here is, our intent is to provide you with some of those answers, some form of an answer that you can give to those fairly standard, fairly typical questions. The person on the other side of the table, they know the answer that they are looking for. You don't. So one of the things that we suggested in last week's session was to clarify, did I answer that to your expectations? Or, follow your answer up with a question of, is that what you were looking for? Something along those lines. Interviewing is an art. Pay attention to them. Pay attention to their responses to your questions, and try to read them. Try to read, there's a lot of phone interviews happening right now. So to the best of your ability, read the responses and the tone, given that you're probably not going to be able to read body language that much. And then practice was, one suggestion that each of us had last week. Find a friend, find a coworker or a colleague or somebody that you can practice your answers with and get very candid feedback on. And then finally, was be a very intentional listener. So, the saying goes, we have one mouth and two ears for a reason. So just make sure that you're doing everything you can to be an engaged listener during the interview, because oftentimes there will be clues that the interviewer gives you along the way that will make your answers even better and more relevant to what they're ideally looking for in the way they phrase the question. So this week we're going to talk about a different set of questions. I do want to, because Sharon wasn't here last week, I do want to pepper in a few of the questions that we talked about last week, because I think they're worth going over again. They're certainly interesting questions, and oftentimes they're asked 5, 6, 7 times in different ways, especially if you're going through panel interviews. But I want to start with one that we kind of ended with last week. Because I think it does warrant us kind of going over again, which is the question about salary, income, or pay. And Nick, you had a very solid answer to this. I'd love for you to share that with people again. But we as recruiters, we in this industry get that question all the time. When somebody says, what do you want? I just got a text 5 minutes before we started this. What do I say? This is what they're going to offer me, and that's not what I was looking for. So I'd love to turn it over to the panel, starting with you, Nick. How do we answer that question of what are you looking to make, or what is the expected pay?
Yeah, thank you. You'll probably have to remind me what I said last week.
I haven't written it down. It was that good.
Answer, but I think it's really something effective. Like overall, I think it's very short-sighted to think about compensation and return only from a salary perspective. There are so many different components to an offer and what you really get from an employer. So look at the holistic package. And then also maybe a second part to that is always like to ask why. So why is that? If you get an offer, or if they say, hey, what are you looking for? You can't respond with why. But if they give you an offer, then you can respond with why. Well, that's interesting. Why is that? So for example, I had an experience. So I got hired at a company, and when I was in the interview process, they asked me what was my salary range. And I gave them a range of $10,000 of what I was looking for. And then there were a number of other things that we talked about, right? And so I got the offer back And the offer was literally the bottom line of what I asked for. So I asked for a $10,000 range, and it was the bare minimum. And the question, and I didn't ask this question, which is like a really great learning lesson for me, but I never asked why that was. So why did I get an offer that was the absolute bottom line? And it always questioned that for me, like throughout the time period. I won't say how long it was, you know who it was, but like through the time period that I worked there, I was always like, well, why is that? Why did they value me? And so I think it's really great in order to ask why, and then also look to all of the things that you can gain: salary, bonus, PTO, work from home, future raises, whatever else you can get.
Yeah.
Was that close, Alan?
It was almost exact. The way you worded it last time was, you said that you are trying to acquire things that mean more to you than the other party, and you're giving up things that mean more to them than to you. And I love the way you phrase that. I mean, that was very beautifully said. But yeah, I mean, that's part of that negotiation, you know, like you said, looking at it holistically. And, you know, we do it all the time. We negotiate equity or PTO, or, you know, 3 weeks of vacation versus 2 weeks of vacation, all those sorts of things. And just take that into consideration when you're talking about that pay question. But Sharon, you didn't get an opportunity last week to chime in on that. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I always encourage our candidates not to say a specific salary, if at all possible, that they're looking for, or even that they're currently at, depending on the state that you are currently living in. It's now illegal in a lot of states to even ask that question. So in Arizona, it's not, but in several other states it is. So I always say that I want to encourage my candidates to say, you know, I really am excited about your opportunity. I know that if I got an offer, it would be a very fair, competitive offer, and I'm really not concerned about that right now. I want to learn more about your company. I want to show you that I'm the right candidate, and then, you know, let's discuss that. I'd love to see your offer package, and I know that we'll be able to work something out. Because really the main goal of the interview is you're interviewing them too. But ultimately, you want to get an offer, right? You want to have an offer that you can actually look at and see all of the offer specifics, you know, the benefit plan. That's very important to a lot of people. If there's stock, etc. So you really want to look at everything, and you won't know all of that information unless you get an offer.
Right.
So you don't want to take up a lot of time talking about salary unless you really know already that you want that job.
Yeah. Yeah, and the company. I mean, that was the text that we were going back and forth on. That the offer is much lower than he was expecting, but it's the company that he really wants to work for. So that's a major consideration. You know, if that's your dream company and you know that you can excel there, you may have to give a little up in order to land it.
Right. And there's things that you can negotiate too, like review periods. Maybe it's not a year, maybe it's 3 months or 6 months. So there's different areas that you can negotiate later as well. Yeah. After you get the offer.
Great points. Christian, I know you had a chance to share your thoughts last week. Did you have anything else to add to what we've already?
Yeah, I think just on top of everything, I think one of the obvious things is, as a candidate, it's typically not beneficial to share a number early in the interviewing process. Interviewing is very much like dating and getting married. So if you can get the employer to be really excited about you as the candidate and perhaps fall in love with you, so to speak, as the candidate, as the chosen one, chances are that they're going to be more agreeable. So if possible, you know, working through and navigating through the interviewing steps and really kind of position yourself so that you can have that conversation toward the end when they've narrowed it down to perhaps just you and one other candidate is oftentimes the best scenario. Another piece is also knowing what's negotiable and what's not. You're not going to get your own 401k. It's set for the company. You're not going to get your own healthcare plan. Again, it's set for the company. So knowing where one can be successful in the conversation is part of the dialogue too. And you can probe a little bit through the conversation where you can read the expressions of the people and their body language. If they're tightening up when you're speaking about a topic, that's usually a cue that it's going to be difficult to negotiate. But if they're smiling and engaging when you're speaking about some other area, then chances are there may be a good foundation for a conversation.
Right. Perfect. And we'll touch on other ones that we talked about last week at the very end if we have some time. But I do want to encourage people, again, please use the chat function, and also, throw in topics if you have ideas or suggestions for other topics that you want to hear about. Please do that as well. And yeah, Nick, I'm glad you mentioned that. This is a great book on negotiation right here. I have it on my desk. It's called Never Split the Difference. It's by Chris Voss. And that is one of the best books I've ever read. There's a whole stack of books on negotiating. And this is from a hostage negotiator. So he's pretty good at negotiating a whole lot of high level and important things. So I don't think salary is a hard one for him to negotiate, honestly. But a great read if you have time to read it. So the next question that I'd like to throw out to the group, and Christian, if you want to grab this one first.
Okay.
How does this role match up with what you've been hoping to do? So that is one of my all-time favorite questions that interviewers ask. I don't know that a lot of interviewers ask it. So it's not one that is truly common, but it's a good one to practice because it does give you so many other word tracks to go on during the interview itself. What are your thoughts on that question?
I think it's an excellent question. And one of the things that it forces anyone to do is to really look at yourself as a candidate and how you match with the requirements and the intent of the role and the responsibilities. When you're faced with any interviewing scenario, you need to take a step back first and look at yourself and say, how good of a candidate am I? In essence, why should you hire me? If you have a game plan where you have identified your strengths and how they align with the requirements of the role, then in essence, this role is actually pretty easy to answer when it comes to why you're a great professional and when you look at the requirements of the role. Now, in terms of the intent and desire and where you want to take your career, you have to be somewhat diplomatic given the circumstances. Sometimes this role that you may be interviewing for could be a stepping stone. Well, you got to get to that stepping stone before you start worrying about the next step. So it's very important to keep in mind that you got to show sincere interest for the role. At the same time, have somewhat of a tempered, ambition during the interview. If your true goal is to later get promoted into a different role, you don't want to end up speaking about this other role all the time. Right. Now, if it is the role, then speak to it and why it's so well aligned with where you're looking to take your career path as well. So strike from strength by looking at how well you match up with the requirements prior.
Sure.
And then launch into that question.
Okay. So I'm going to throw a little curveball in there for Nick and Sharon. So let's say that question does come up. How does this role match up with what you've been hoping to do? But you're in a position as a candidate where you need a job, and there's a lot of people in this situation right now where they need to find a job. And this is not necessarily, this may be, and we've all advised people who are taking a step down or a step laterally, or just a step in a direction that they weren't necessarily expecting that they would have to take. How do they answer that question, as truthfully as they can, knowing fully well that it's not, it's just not what I was hoping to do, but it's an offer that I might get and I need to put food on my table.
I'll go ahead and jump in, Nick. No, I think you can find joy and passion in anything if you look for it. So I think one of the most important things to do is to really research that role, so going in there, what did attract me to this position, and the company, the culture, the people that you might work with, what you can actually learn or gain from being in that role. Because even if it's not something that we want to do ultimately for a long period of time, it's still a stepping stone. And we need to look at it not so much as, this is what I want to be doing later, but what can I get out of it right now? Because there is always that silver lining. There's always something positive. And if you go in and convey that in the interview, chances are you're going to do a lot better in the interview. And if there really isn't anything, if you can't find anything that seems to be exciting, then even though you need a position, you need to not interview. You need to go find another one, because that's going to show up. you know, people are going to see right through that. So yeah, that's my advice. Find something that's exciting, that's going to be helpful for you in that interview.
Got it. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, that's perfect. I think you should always be able to answer this question, and it's always honestly and truthful. And what it's really not is not an opportunity for you to sell yourself. And so it's really just give an honest evaluation. So I'll give you an example. So here in Phoenix, I'm involved with an organization called St. Joseph the Worker. And what the organization was originally designed for was to end the cycle of homelessness through sustainable employment. And what's unique about this time period than most is what we're seeing right now is there's a lot of people, or a significant amount of people with or who are used to earning six-figure incomes, like healthy six-figure incomes, that are coming to us for advice and help and are accepting $16 an hour jobs. And so, you know, and it is still their dream job, and it's still the great role, because what they're looking at it is like an evaluation of how it fits into their life. And so they're like, hey, the six-figure income, probably not the right opportunity. I can't go do that anymore, right? For one reason or another, that's not there. But what this does is give me an opportunity to start with a company that's big and it's growing, and there's maybe other things that I can do there. And so I'm going to come in, I'm very thankful for the role, come in, I'm going to do great work for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and maybe if something other comes up, great, it's an opportunity for me to skyrocket. And so is it the same, you know, big, sexy, six-figure role? No, it's not, but it's still like a really great fit for that person. And what we've seen success in is people just honestly answering it and just giving a straight evaluation. Because what you can do through that is show your intelligence through that, right?
Yeah.
On a real evaluation and put yourself on the other side.
Yeah, it's a real thing. And Christian, I don't know if you want to chime in, but I know all of us deal with people, you know, not only just now, I mean, over the course of the last, you know, 20 plus years, you know, I've been dealing with, I don't want to take a role that's lesser than what I've done, but I feel like I need to right now. And it is, you know, I think to your point, Nick, and to what you said, Sharon, it's being honest with yourself. You know, a lot of times you can find a mission behind the company that you can lock onto, you know, and say, I like the mission of this organization. And I've never worked for a mission-based company. Yeah, I've never worked for a company that's looking to, you know, secure our world, or, you know, if you're going to work for Axon or something like that, you know, a company that is really looking to, you know, end senseless killing. You know, how do we solve that? Maybe through, you know, cameras and through tasers. You know, that's a mission that company has, and that's what drives them. So if you can find something like that to lock onto, you might benefit. But if it is, you know, just not a mission-driven company and you're having difficulty finding it, I agree with Sharon that sometimes you do have to walk away, or it's sometimes going to be obvious that you're, you know, not being truthful with them or yourself. And that's a much tougher sell, because people will notice that you're probably not going to be there for a long period of time.
I think also on top of that, sometimes when we sense that we may not be connecting when we're interviewing, you know, the question is, so to speak, okay, you used to make 100,000, here you are interviewing for a role that is paying 40, just hypothetically speaking. If you're going through a change in life where it makes sense and it's somewhat positive in nature, feel free to share that. Sometimes we have other things that are pulling away from us. It could be caring for an elderly parent. It could be that we're choosing to go to school and get further education. It could be that we are spending more time with our children, helping them through their extracurricular activities. It could be quite a few other things. But when it is something where it allows you to kind of explain and bridge, absolutely bring it to their attention, because then it become a genuine conversation.
Yeah, perfect. And again, everybody, feel free to use a chat and Q&A function to throw in your thoughts or any other questions you have. So the next question that almost every single interviewer asks is either what do you know about our company, or why did you apply to this role? You know, what do you know about our company is one that's very near and dear to my heart. And I think I've probably shared it on this webinar. I remember sending somebody to an interview at PetSmart 100 years ago, and he walked into the main corporate office and said, "Where do you guys make the dog food?" And I'm like, "Oh, this is not going to go well. This is not going to go well at all." It's not a good way to start. So what do you know about our company is an important question, and one that, people like to talk about themselves. So how do you guys advise people answer that or prepare for that question, which can come in a number of different varieties? And Nick Morrison, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, you've got to be prepared to answer that question. Hopefully that goes without saying, but it comes up in it's going to come up in every interview, every conversation. So expect that it is. One funny thing that I hear happen like a lot of times is somebody will throw it back saying that like, well, I really like to hear it directly from the person. So would you tell me about, and I hear that response a whole lot and it just doesn't work. And so information is readily available today more than it ever has been in the history of the world. And so it's just expected that you can find information on the company. And so I think the way that you answer it are things that you've discovered, but you don't want to tell them, maybe what you don't want to do is give recommendations. So, hey, I saw this on your website. Hey, your website sucks. Maybe you should change it. I see that in marketing, marketing or sales. People come at, hey, the website, we got to change that. Well, it's like you can't make recommendations about the company maybe that early on. And so use that in a way in order to maybe raise some intelligent questions. So say 30, 60, 90 seconds. A lot of times interviewers will ask that in order to get settled into a conversation. So like as they're shuffling around notes or trying to figure out where to start, they'll ask you about that. So 30, 60, 90 seconds, and then end it with a question. So, hey, by the way, I saw this on your website or this on your blog. What do you think about that? Or, that's my evaluation of the company. What are your thoughts? So some way to ask some sort of intelligent question back.
Sharon, what are your thoughts on what do you know about our company?
Yeah, so I have to echo Nick. I mean, there's so much information that's available online now. So the amount of information that you can gather before an interview it's lengthy. So you should definitely research not only their website, the key leaders, most of the time those are going to be listed on the website as well. Their LinkedIn profiles, if you can get the names of the people that you are going to actually meet with to really understand how long they've been with the organization, how they tie into the company, and just really, I would say, practice that. You should be able to, know and recite a little bit about their company without fumbling, like Nick said. Like, be prepared and really know what drew you to that company and be able to add that.
Yep. Christian, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say to earlier points, absolutely, I agree 100%. And then know when to turn it off too. The individuals on the other side.
Uh-oh. We've got everybody else moving, but Christian froze. All right. I don't know what happened to Christian. Hopefully he's okay.
He'll come back.
He doesn't look well right now. we'll leave him there.
You better not say that about me if I freeze up, Alan.
No, I totally
I'll be like
so let me just add to this. So what do you know about our company? Don't go negative. Like if you've read Glassdoor, if you've read any negative reviews, don't bring that stuff up. I've had candidates do that unfortunate thing where they've brought in some of the, hey, maybe I can help improve that. Don't do that. That's not a good way to show up either. Another question that gets asked often is, what type of manager do you work best with? And that is a very interesting question. It's certainly not one that would be a, hey, he's back. We were worried about you, man.
I heard I froze.
You did. We'll come back around to that one, Christian, in a minute. Mm-hmm. Right now, we just launched into what type of manager do you work best with, which is another one of those questions that is very oftentimes asked, number one, and is not, I don't know that Sean would call it a trap question. I know last week Sean was saying some of these are trap questions. This one is not. This is one that really takes a lot of thought and gives you an opportunity, I think, to go through previous managers, previous supervisors, previous bosses, or even people that you've read about, and be able to give some anecdotal evidence as to why you perform best with them or things along those lines. But Sharon, do you want to kick us off on the answers that you help people with?
Yeah.
As it relates to that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You really want to look back in your previous work history, and this is good to do before an interview, and really identify, where do you work best? Do you work best with a leader that gives you a lot of opportunity to come up with your own solutions, or do you, want to work for someone that's, is much more structured, in their leadership? So I do think that that's a really good question to ask, just in general, as you're looking at your job search, and to really know it, like know the answer to that before you're asked it, and just be honest, because you want to make sure that you're best aligned with a management team and leadership team where you're going to thrive. So you don't want to just say something because you think, the manager might be this type of manager, because then once you get in there, if that's not really where you're going to thrive, then you're not going to be happy. And ultimately, I always say you want to love your job and you want to enjoy where you're working. And so taking that time ahead of time, even if you don't get a position, obviously what I was saying before, you want to get an offer and you want to get to the next step, but you want to be honest with yourself and with them and make sure that it's the right opportunity, not just, just a job.
No, that's an incredible point. I think, what you just said with regards to answering that question truthfully, if you change that answer to match what you think they're looking for, you could set yourself up for a horrible loss. You don't want to work for somebody who's the exact opposite of who you're going to have success with. So that's a really good point. Nick, what would you add to that?
So I think this question and every variation around it is amazing. And so it's the same thing as asking, what's the opposite of a manager, an employee or a direct report, right? So it's the same thing as you asking in an interview, hey, how can I be the best employee possible for you? So I'll assume positive intent here. How about that? So I'll assume that somebody is asking from a place of like, how, if I were to hire you and you were to come start with me, how could I be the best manager possible for you? So I'll assume that they have some flexibility and that they just want to mend themselves best to you. But yeah, to Sharon's point, just be honest. Because if they are really asking to show how can I create the best environment for you, and you tell them exactly what would really make you or make them the best manager to you, i.e. making you the most productive and engaged and best employee for them, if you get that like honest, open, boom, then it's a pretty good start.
Yeah. Christian, do you have some thoughts on that and how you prepare people for that question also?
Sure. Yeah. Hopefully I won't fall off this time. But on top of what was already said, it's a trap question in that sometimes we go negative. So avoid speaking about all the things that you don't like, all the things that you won't, the environments that you don't like and want to work in. So stay positive, and I think both Nick and Sharon spoke to that. But as the conversation goes on, sometimes it's easy to fall into that trap and talk about all the things we don't want to do, and just stay focused. That's my own way too.
Okay. Yeah, and I think it's somewhat like what we talked about last week when we said, I think at least the way we were suggesting people respond to walk me through your resume or tell us about yourself or tell me about yourself was be direct, keep it short, make sure what you're looking for and those sorts of things, and then talk about present, past, and future. But again, I think as far as the best type of manager that I work with, use anecdotes. I really think that this is a place where you can say, well, I think where I found the most success was when I worked for John, and this is what I did for John, and this is what he was asking me to do, et cetera, et cetera. But being able to, and I think Sean mentioned this in our last week's meeting, be able to prove it. Give some level of proof. And when they say, what type of manager do you work best with? That's an opportunity to prove this is why I work best with that kind of manager, because I've been able to bring this level of success to that company under that leader. Okay, so I got this question Thursday, Friday. Somebody had, you know what? It was probably more recent than that. Somebody had 3 interviews going on this week. This current week, but they received an offer on Thursday of last week. So that company on Thursday of last week said, when can you start? Knowing that they had 3 more interviews coming up this week added a whole new level of complexity to that answer. because I want to go through those other interviews. I want to see what those companies have to say. So the when can you start question is certainly a question that we get, but I want to start it off with the wrench of, okay, I've interviewed, they've said when can you start, but I still have 2 other interviews pending with other companies, which a lot of the folks on our webinar today or listening to the recorded session are probably going to have that scenario, or could very likely have that scenario. How do we address that? Like, how do you delay saying I can start on Monday just so you can go through the interview with a couple other companies and see where those cards fall as well? And we won't have Christian start because I don't think he heard the question. Nick, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I have a direct answer to that, but I think it's always best, what I find, in order to share those things, that, hey, I do have other interviews that I'm finishing up. And you can almost say it from a commitment standpoint. So I've committed to these companies to meeting with them next week. And so I want to follow through on my commitment to do that. But maybe the analogy that I'll use, because I'm not coming up with a great answer, is like Shark Tank, you know, that CBS show Shark Tank, right? And so it's like you get an offer from one of the sharks, and then you're like, thank you so much for your offer. I'll go talk to other ones. Well, like, they have the opportunity, you know what I mean? Things get dicey. So just know that, like, there's a risk, that there's an inherent risk in order to saying no, or maybe, or like, hey, let me wait another week. They may pull the offer off the table. There may be somebody else who can start in between. But if you've got another 3 companies that are lined up that you're more excited about, and you're like, hey, I'm willing to take that risk, then I say just let them know that you've committed to meeting with 3 other companies. You're really excited. Thank them so much for their time and their offer. You'll keep them updated and give them the answer at the end of the week.
Got it. What do you think, Sharon?
Yeah, I would say it depends, you know, if they're just in the interview phase, you haven't even gotten to the offer phase. So if it is on a Thursday and you have a couple other interviews lined up for, you know, early that next week, you probably still have a fair amount of time until they actually give you that offer. So I would just, you know, be honest with them. I don't think they need to know specifics, like I have 2 other interviews next week. But you can say, you know, from the time I get the offer, I'd like to start as soon as I possibly can. I have a few commitments and things I need to tie up, but it would be, you know, a fairly soon, you know, opportunity. I'd want to get started as soon as I could.
Right.
But
Christian,
leave it a little bit open-ended.
Right. Totally
I
agree.
think, yeah, I think Nick and Sharon said it well. The one tricky piece is if you're too clear sometimes and too pushy in terms of your interest for the other roles, it could also be misunderstood as a lack of interest for them. So it is a little bit of a test of an interest. So depending on where they're at in the process, to Sharon's point, if there is no offer, then that is a very different scenario than if they put a written offer in front of you. My advice is keep in mind that anytime you do get an offer, you do have the right to sit on it for a while. And a perfectly okay answer is to say, thank you so much. This sounds very exciting. Let me take a look at it and discuss it with my family. I do have a few other things that I've committed to next week, and I was hoping that perhaps I could get back to you sometime next week at a time that makes sense for you, if that works for you. That way you buy time. While at the same time you show sincere interest and gratitude for the offer that they've extended.
Perfect. So we have a question from the folks here. How do you answer the question, what other job opportunities do you have going on right now? So, you know, somewhat similar, I think, scenario to that, but maybe phrased a little bit differently. When can you start is a way to ferret that out. I think, you know, at least I do that. You know, if we have an offer for you, when are you available to start, is basically saying, what else do you have going on? So is would you guys say that's the same answer that you just gave, or are there nuances to this answer?
I think there should be nuances. Interviewing is very much like dating. And if you do have other things going, you should certainly share that you're being courted by other employers. You don't need to go into details who they are, but it is okay to say, you know what, I am, you know, actively interviewing. I don't have anything currently that I have to make a decision on, but I'm very excited to be here today to learn more about your opportunity. I think that's one of the basic answers that I think will go well with in most scenarios. You're being truthful, but you're not sharing too many details.
Right. Yeah, it is one of those spots that you get put in where it's tough to the transparency with a question like this becomes a little bit tricky. It really does, because you want to be transparent, you want to be truthful. I would say if just my own 2 cents, Nick, if you were to say I've got 3 other interviews next week that I've already committed to, I would say, what do we need to do to make you cancel those? Or what does this offer need to look like in order for you to cancel those other interviews? So I would dig probably a little bit deeper on that. And some interviewers might. I don't know that all of them would, because they're not always coached to do that. I've been coached to do that, so that's why I do it. But it can be tricky. So I would say, Pat, to answer your question, and hopefully this helps, is just say I do have other things right now in the queue. I do have other opportunities, other things that I am exploring. I really have enjoyed this conversation. I'm excited about this opportunity, but it's going to require a little bit more thought. And I would try to keep it super short, super simple, and provide some level of transparency, but probably not show all your cards. Okay, good. So that answered that question. Okay, so not that we're going to end with this, but most interviews do end with this. And I think we've talked about it at least briefly in other webinars. Do you have any questions for me? So, and I know we've talked about it briefly. I don't think we've done an entire session on this necessarily, but that is almost always going to be the final question asked during an interview. Do you have any questions for me? So how do you all prepare your candidates for that question? And what do you tell them, especially if they're going in front of, let's say they're going in front of 5 or 6, it's a panel interview, or even 5 or 6 individual interviews, each 30 minutes, and they're going to be there for 3-4 hours. What are your recommendations on preparing for that question? Do you have any questions for me, which is 99.5% chance you're going to get asked that? Sharon, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So you always do want to have questions that you have prepared for. And I think one of the most important things is you also too want to really listen in the interview. And if they've already answered that or addressed it, make sure you don't ask it again, because then it comes off that you weren't listening to them and you're asking something that they already, went through. So I would pick something, if you're in a panel interview or if you're meeting one-on-one with an individual manager, trying to build that rapport at the end, if there's anything that they weren't able to cover, or even about their background, like what attracted them to the company, to try to get a little bit more rapport with that individual person. They're going to remember you, you're going to stand out. So I would say, make it authentic, but definitely have a number of questions that you could ask each interviewer, because the worst thing that you can do is not have any questions, or like I was saying, to ask something that they already went over.
Yeah, no, those are great points. And I don't know, I'm guessing all of you also recommend they write those questions down before they walk into the interview. It's just so commonplace that you're going to forget what you wanted to ask. And people are like, oh no, I have it up here. You'll lose it. The nerves of an interview, the rigor of an interview, the pace, you will forget. So write those questions down, bring a notepad, just have a blank notepad with you and write them down. And as they're answering them, as you're going through, just put check marks by them and say, okay, I don't need to ask this because you already answered this. Nick, what are your thoughts on, do you have any questions for me?
I like the check mark thing. So definitely I recommend writing down the questions. And that's the beautiful thing about being over phone or video. They don't know what's in front of you, right? So you can have questions in front of you, but don't write answers down because it distracts from the conversation. And so certainly don't do that. But the entire reason why you do research beforehand, before going into an interview, is so that you don't ask where does PetSmart make the pet food, right? So you're not not asking that, but you're asking intelligent questions that demonstrate your ability in order to do research and to walk in. It almost, to me, feels like a respect thing. And I hear that a lot also about executives that are hiring, that, hey, they didn't really know much about me or didn't ask much about this. It just seems strange they're coming in. So definitely have questions that are prepared and use that as a way to demonstrate your intelligence and your excitement about the company, but always definitely make sure that you have some questions.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, real quick point, each and every one of you have mentioned this in the past, but don't make them self-serving questions. That is not the time to say, what is this going to pay? Or what are the benefits like? Or, how close is my cube to the vending machine? Those are not the questions that you should be asking. The questions you should be asking are, what does success look like in this role? How do you, the person who's been the most successful in the role that you're interviewing me for, what did they do to be successful? You could even ask them, the very first question that we started with today, well, I think we recapped a little bit of last week, but how does this role match up with what you've been hoping to do? You can ask the person who's interviewing you that question, and that is a memorable question. Is this role that you're in right now everything that you thought it was going to be? Again, people like talking about themselves. And if you're getting a vibe that they do enjoy what they do, feel free to ask that question, because you want to grab onto some of that. If they seem like a cynic and negative and horrible, maybe you don't want to proceed in the interview, but I also wouldn't ask that question because that might not be a great question to ask. Christian, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that this is one area many stumble, and there is a fine line of asking too many questions and certainly not enough. Hollywood taught us the number 3, so to speak. So having 3 good questions where the third one is indeed your close question. I think that close should always be, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today. Would love to be part of the next steps, coincidentally, not at all. Coincidentally, that is my last question, is what are the next steps? That allows you to determine the timeline for next steps. If they're thinking about interviewing you again tomorrow or a week from now, or they'll get back to you in 2, that's a kind of a critical piece from a follow-up perspective.
Yeah.
But this is one area where I have unfortunately seen candidates lose jobs because they just couldn't close out the interview properly. And it's usually lack of questions, but in all fairness, I've had a few candidates over the years who almost overstayed their welcome because they were trying to show that they were so well prepared. And after 10 questions, the employer was like, we need to wrap up.
Yeah. Yeah. Three very good questions I think are accurate. So then the second part of what I was saying, let's say it's 5 different people that you're interviewing with, is it safe? And I'll just get a quick yes or no from each one of you, because I'm really curious about this. Is it safe if you're meeting with 5 people to ask each one of them the exact same 3 questions?
No.
What do you think, Nick?
I say yes. And I even recommend people to ask the same question to the same people on different occasions. And what we're trying to do is build data points. So for example, if you ask the same question to all 5 people and you get radically different answers, then the team is probably not very well aligned, very separated, and you need to take that into account. And so, yeah, I say ask the same question to multiple people, maybe not the same question, maybe not the same 3 questions to all 5 people, because that'll dominate the whole conversation. You probably won't be able to ask anything else. But ask at least maybe 1 question to all of the same people and look for consistencies or inconsistencies.
And you're saying don't ask it exactly the same way, maybe have a little spin?
No, so sorry, I'm saying at least one of those questions, ask it to all 5 of those people, but don't ask all 3 of those questions to all 5 people. Because that'll probably be the entire conversation, and you want to learn more things and get into some other topics. But what I'm looking for, data points. And so are people getting, you know what I mean? Is there consistency? Is everybody on the same page? Close alignment, accomplishing the same mission? Or is everybody wildly misaligned, separated workforce, maybe not a place I want to go?
Sharon, what are your thoughts? Same question to all panelists or all interviewers, or do we have to change the questions?
I think I love what Nick said. I hadn't thought of that, and that's a really good point. I think it depends. I think you need to read the interviewer a little bit. Even sometimes you might be asking, let's say you're on your second question and you can feel that the interviewer is trying to like wrap up and they're looking at their watch, or I think you need to do a little bit of reading to know how much, in depth should I go? How many questions are appropriate and what should I be asking? But I do think like asking the same, if there's one question that really would help you decide, is this the team that I want to work with? And is this the company? I think it's a great idea to ask that same question to all three, but I don't think you should be, it should be so scripted that you're, reading every single question to every single person, make it sound like it's more of a conversation versus interrogation.
Right. And Christian, you were shaking your head no when I threw that out. Did Nick convince you otherwise? Did Nick and Sharon convince you otherwise?
I think Nick did a great job. I was just visualizing 5 panelists getting the same questions 15 times thrown out by the candidate. So the volume was my concern. I do think one should change it up. And I do think in a panel interview, it is slightly different than we interviewing one-on-one or two-on-one, so to speak. And I think it's okay to kind of mix it up as a candidate when you're looking at a panel, because obviously sometimes people bring different responsibilities and take on things. And if you're sitting in front of a CFO, in all fairness, I would want to ask him or her something different than, say, the QA tester who was part of the team as well. And if they're both in the same room, that would get tricky. So I would kind of tailor it to the audience.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely would. And I would say, one question that you can consistently ask each and every one is, what gets you excited about working here? That's a very easy question to ask of anyone you meet at the organization. What is it that interests you and keeps you going and gets you up every day to come to work? What is it about this company that makes that happen? But yeah, to everyone's point, I would say it's okay to ask, like Nick said, okay to ask one question that might be exactly the same. And that's usually the one I recommend asking. But the rest of them, I'm a fan of, like to Christian's point, tailoring it to the role. If it's not going to be somebody that you're directly reporting to and they have no influence over your role, you don't want to ask them what's going to make you successful in that role. You may want to ask them what makes them successful at the company, or, how well the company collaborates or things like that. But, I wouldn't necessarily ask the same questions of all the people you're talking to. So I again encourage you guys in the chat area to write down what you'd like to hear about in the next webinar. Any other questions that you have, please share them there. But I wanted to quickly, if I can, I don't know that I can quickly enough, but I wanted to share one point from last week's webinar as well. We talked about greatest weaknesses, and I got a response on my LinkedIn message that I thought was really interesting. So I wanted to share it real quickly. So I had one individual respond to me. I just posted, the question about greatest weaknesses, and this individual said, Anthony Garone, actually a very good friend of mine, said, so much to say about this. When I care too much, I work too hard, not weaknesses. He said, I often will rephrase the question as, what are you working on to improve yourself? Or tell me how you've overcome a weakness. So you might get those questions instead. So, and I love those. What are you working on to improve yourself? Or tell me how you've overcome a weakness. And then he said he sometimes asks, what are you good at? And what do you suck at? Which are amazingly good questions too. So I wanted to, just kind of spend the last 3 or 4 minutes that we have here talking about those variations, because all the questions that we're throwing out are variations of other questions, really. So how would you all suggest, what are you working on to improve yourself? Like it's just another spin on your weaknesses. And Sharon, you're shaking your head yes, as if you're ready for this one.
It's a really great question. And I think what Anthony was saying and implying, I think there's a couple things. I think it's important to always be self-aware. And that's something just personally, I try to always be as self-aware as possible and know, okay, what what is my challenge with any particular thing? And how can I overcome it? So I think when people get asked that in an interview, you want to be, of course, careful because, and I know you talked about this last week, so I won't go into too much of it, but you want to pick something that isn't the main role of the job, right? Because that's going to make you not a candidate anymore.
Really
so you
bad
want to
with
pick
numbers.
something, yeah, right. And you're an accountant. So you want to pick something that would be kind of trivial to the role that you're applying for. And you really want to focus on the solution. And it could be something that you learned a long time ago. So use something, well, I used to be really bad at this, or I struggled. This was a challenge for me. And what I've had to do is I've had to overcome it by this, and really focus more on the solution and how you've accomplished something and changed something and what you learned from it, rather than just saying, you know, I'm bad with numbers or, you know, something like that.
Right.
Focus on the positive.
Perfect. Christian, what are your thoughts?
I think that's a great question. In technical interviews where you have people who are, you know, coders, you know, developers, software, it's very common to determine where the candidate is really strong, technically speaking. But then the conversation will always go to the peripheries of their technical knowledge. And that's where the conversation usually comes then. And said, okay, I see that you're not so strong in this programming language or that programming language or that technology, and that's okay. But do embrace it and speak to it then and say, well, these are the things that I'm doing to improve my skill set. That approach can be, you know, used in many other areas too. For instance, in accounting, if you're not sure really what 606 revenue accounting is, revenue recognition is, maybe you should read up on it and speak to it and attend a few CPE events and so on and so on and so on. So the opportunity to speak about how you're bettering yourself is a phenomenal scenario for any candidate, much better than tell me about your greatest weakness. That's a little bit more of a kind of a conversation, but it can be overcome, of course, as well.
Nick, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, in every job ever, you're going to need to learn something new. So even at a McDonald's franchise where the training is 15 minutes, right, or less than 15 minutes, you still need to learn something new, and it changes, right? And so what that question normally goes to, and I like this variation of it, I like to spin on it, what it's basically saying is like, hey, are you able to learn? Can you come into our environment, and maybe you've got relatable skills, but can you come into our environment, learn, and adapt over time? And so that's typically where that question is coming from. And so, yeah, take something that maybe you just did for the first time, or just some way to demonstrate that I can learn something new, and then also be coachable. So if you can spin it some way to say that, like, hey, I took coaching or direction from somebody, that could be a good spin, because you're probably going to have somebody you're reporting to or taking direction from.
Yep. Excellent. Well, I would encourage everyone again, if there are specific topics that you would like for this crew to cover, please add it to the chat function right now. I don't know that there's anything to add unless anyone else has any other questions, or panelists, do you guys have anything else to add? Any other thoughts?
I think
Parting thoughts?
I would just encourage everyone on the call or listening to this afterwards, if you have specific questions and need help on how to answer, maybe you just were in an interview and you have a question on how could I have answered this better? I mean, feel free, we're all on here to help you guys. So feel free to, you know, reach out to one of us and we can give you suggestions or tools that might help, because if you get that question once, you're probably going to get it again. So
Yep.
reach
Great
out.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, please do reach out, everyone. If we're not connected on LinkedIn, connect with us on LinkedIn. Each and every one of us is totally available to help you out, and we're happy to do it. So,
Yeah.
Hey,
We'll always
Alan,
accept.
I know we're kind of right on time here at 12:30, but would you be willing, or maybe we could throw it out to the group, just a quick evaluation of maybe the hiring landscape today? I mean, maybe generally from my perspective, it seems like things are opening up. We saw the jobs report we saw on Friday, but would anybody be willing to kind of give their quick evaluation on the rate of hiring today?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, I mentioned it during this conversation. I mean, I've had 3 or 4 candidates reach out to me in the last 4 or 5 days, indicating that they have multiple interviews and are expecting a handful of offers. So that didn't happen 2 weeks ago. That didn't happen, other than the last 5 or 6 days, I have not seen that happen. So that's a huge indicator that things are starting to loosen up a little, at least in my world.
Yeah, I echo that. It was the beginning of last week, I started to see things were picking back up. Clients that were pausing on positions, they definitely are moving forward now. So there's a lot more jobs posted and activity in the past couple weeks, which is really good.
Yep.
Yeah.
Seeing the same thing, Christian?
Yeah, I would agree with the movement among clients and candidates. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports are consistently incorrect. So to be polite, I would say they're consistently inconsistent. So the trick is to kind of dive into the details there. And there was a huge statistical error in the Friday report or Thursday report that was discovered fairly quickly. But statistics aside, the reality, the real world is, yes, it's picking up and candidates are getting interviews and job offers. Absolutely.
Yeah. Excellent. Anyone have anything else? Perfect. We appreciate it, everyone. Thanks for being here, and we will see you all next week.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Awesome.
See ya.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.